I'm Phil Rickaby, and I've been a writer and performer for almost 30 years. But I've realized that I don't really know as much as I should about the theater scene outside of my particular Toronto bubble. Now, I'm on a quest to learn as much as I can about the theater scene across Canada. So join me as I talk with mainstream theater creators you may have heard of and indie artists you really should know, as we find out just what it takes to be stage-worthy. If you value the work that I do on Stageworthy, please consider leaving a donation either as a one-time thing or on a recurring monthly basis. Stageworthy is created entirely by me, and I give it to you free of charge with no advertising or other sponsored messages. Your continuing support helps me to cover the cost of producing and distributing the show. Just 4 people donating $5 a month would help me cover the cost of podcast hosting alone. Help me continue to bring you this podcast. You can find a link to donate in the show notes, which you can find in your podcast app or at the website at stageworthy.ca. Now, on to the show. Genevieve Adam is a playwright and performer based in Toronto. She is the writer of the plays Deceitful Above All Things, New World, Dark Heart, and more. As a performer, she's been seen in Thought for Foods, Measure for Measure, Seven Siblings Recall, and much more. In this conversation, we bond over our shared theatre school experiences, studying and working in the UK, and then returning to Canada, as well as how she started writing in the first place. Here's our conversation. Genevieve, you are a fellow graduate of George Brown Theatre School.
Oh, I didn't know we were fellows. Phil!
I know!
That's exciting. I didn't know that about you.
I went to George Brown in ancient times when it was in the warehouse at King and River Street.
Yes.
Way back in ancient times.
But see, I think we could be of a vintage though, Phil, because I was there in those times too. We used to split between the Casa Loma basement, which was also inhabited by plumbers, and then the warehouse at King and River.
That must have been, that's when they were performing at King and River and classes were at Casa Loma. So you were there.
Correct.
So you probably were there like in that transition period because they were there in the basement at Casa Loma for a year and then at a school in Kensington. And
yes.
Yeah.
I only heard about the school in Kensington. I never actually got to experience that other brand of exciting. That was very cold, I understand. The Casa Loma basement with the plumbers was very harassy. And then the warehouse at King and River was very urban, I guess, for lack of a better word.
It was urban, but I did hear a story about there was like some kind of hidden room that had been discovered and decorated,
this is the scuttlebutt that lives on forever. I don't know, man. We spent a lot of time there. I never found the secret cabal, but I was a young person there. I think it was, I want to say like 99 to 2002 or something. I think sounds about right, or 98. I don't know. Too long ago now. Who knows? So,
yeah, it does feel a long time ago.
It certainly does.
Now, were you always did you always feel like acting was your thing, or was writing your thing, or what was your theater origin story?
I think my parents just needed a hobby for me, really. Like I just started doing community musicals about the time my brother was born. I think they were like, here, do this. So I just kind of did community sing-along musicals all throughout my young life, and I don't know, I just felt that acting was the thing. Writing was not a thing at all, and in fact, having been to George Brown, you will know that they gave us many lectures to the effect of, you will never work, you will have to make your own work. So here is some devising courses and blah, 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 to which I paid zero attention. I was like, that's for other people. I will clearly be going on to be hired by others my entire career, right? So I never thought about it seriously at that time.
Do you know what is really interesting about that is I can see the shift in faculty around that time, because when I was at school in the really ancient times, we were told that if we were going to do any work, we had to be actors and singers, and we didn't need to dance, but we needed to be able to move
well.
We didn't necessarily need to do that, and nobody ever talked to us about production or self-production. At one point, I remember, this is back in the days when they needed to cut people from the program.
Yes.
And I was told at one point, well, maybe if you really need to perform, you could do things at the Fringe Festival. That was like like when I was near because I spent a lot of years like being like, well, we're thinking about cutting you, and that's one of the things they said. But that's a huge change from you're never going to need to self-produce because we're training you how to get work to self-producing is a necessary part of your theater career. And that's kind of huge as far as like that shift goes. But as you were saying, you were like, other people are going to have to do that.
Yeah, if only I had caught the wave, I could be further ahead. And they brought in really exciting people who were making their own work and self-producing. Like now I just think, man, I should have milked those connections. But instead I was just like, this is an interesting 2 weeks until we get on to the real stuff. I didn't pay it any heed in my youthful exuberance, which was a mistake because it is the way forward. But it is funny how things have changed, right? And it's funny too, the destiny that your theater training can predict for you, which you should not listen to because they don't know.
Well, that's absolutely the thing, because you'll find like there's every class has the golden children.
Yes.
And they're the people who get they get leads, they get this, and but that's no indication that of what's going to happen outside of school.
No,
it's no indication. Yeah,
there's no indication of anything. No,
yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting. The people who are still working, I don't think certainly weren't those people. And sometimes like people got really exciting, starry jobs out of school, and we were like, oh, that's it. They're off now. They're launched, and then it didn't. They're not acting today. That was maybe their one big thing, or a couple people won Doras, and we were like, oh, well, they're set. But then they never worked. Like it's just funny. It's not a straight linear path.
No,
by any stretch of the imagination.
One of the things that I find interesting, and this sort of started to really like kind of make me angry after, about 10 years after theater school, is thinking back of the people who got cut.
Yeah.
And they would say often, well, we just don't think that you have we don't think that you have a career outside of, career ahead of you, or you're not a good fit for the school. But mostly it was sort of like we don't think that you have a future in the industry. And I sort of was like, about 10 years after, it's like, how dare you make that assumption? You don't know.
That's interesting. See, cutting in my time was more like, you guys are spending too much time raving every weekend. You need to like do some work.
I mean,
that was most of it. I don't know if there was anyone who was cut who didn't kind of find it a blessing, like there were, and it is interesting because our year, for whatever reason, had kind of an okay time of it. Like certainly the folks directly ahead of us and the folks directly behind us did not have a good time at the school for reasons that have been debated here and there and widely about what the culture of the school was at that time. But for us, it was really like, and I'm sure someone will pop out of the woodwork to correct me, but I can't remember someone being cut who wasn't ready for that or kind of moving in that direction, or who was just a bit like, I'm just kind of biding my time while I figure out what to do.
Yeah.
I recall. I mean, who knows? I think at one point we were all on probation though. Most of us. I certainly was.
Well,
it was got to get your stuff together, kids.
We were too afraid to go raving. We were too afraid to. We didn't. I mean, first off, I'm going to be honest with you. I was at the school pre-rave culture.
Okay.
because I'm an old man. So we were really kind of afraid of especially once those first few people get cut, you're like, the fear runs through the.
It's good.
Unless you're one of the golden children, the fear just runs through the class, and
it does.
That's kind of a terrible environment to create in.
It is
the fear.
Well, that's interesting. Like, that's what happened to me. Like, that's why I got put on probation, actually, is because, that Christmas of second year, right before you move into really big projects, period study and all that kind of stuff, which is an 8-hour theater festival for those of you who didn't go through the Georgetown program. Yeah, I think I had just kind of tapped out in second year. I was like, I'm not going to engage emotionally with this process. And, that's why I got put on probation. They were like, we need you to come back. We need you to come back and start, get really daring to do stuff again, as opposed to just kind of sitting there on the sidelines, cracking Foxy with sarcastic remarks, which is sort of where I had gone. And I wonder, in looking back, if it had something to do with that fear. Yeah, because it's not nice. It's not a nice job. I don't even know if they do still cut people now. What with it being college affiliated, I don't even know if they can do that anymore.
I mean, they were very clear to us that they marked us, that many of the teachers were encouraged to mark us low so that they could cut us, right?
Yep.
So because they, what's an A actor as opposed to an A- actor? That kind of joke is what they would say, but they had the ability to cut us because they marked us low. They would say the comments are what matter, not the grade.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Right?
That didn't change. That was the line.
No.
Yeah.
So you end up with that. As I understand it, they haven't cut people from the program at that school in several years.
Right. You got to wonder. I mean, what's a bigger cruelty, right? To, like, our year, they admitted 33 people and we finished off with 14. 6 women and 8 men. And you think that even probably is too many. So is it better to cull us down then, or to just release 40 actors into the system every year who aren't going to work anyway? I don't know. And then I hear that other programs, like at York, they cut people, but then they say, hey, you can go work in makeup and stage. They kind of just smear them over there into production, which is probably a bigger path to working. Like, golly, if you're a stage manager now, you've got your pick these days, right? So,
well, I mean,
I don't know.
At York, they do start you with like a general course, and then they sort of try to stream you into the courses after that.
Right.
But I think what they're finding now is that people, if you let them self-select.
Mm-hmm. Well, you should, right? You should let people self-select.
But I think you need to give people the option. And I think that they've found that people generally tend to say, you know what? Not for me. But but I think when you start cutting people, there's other people who like dig in their heels and like, I'm not fucking getting out of here unless you guys make me.
Yeah, I mean, there is some of that, or, there were the surprise cuts, the ones you didn't necessarily see coming, and then people would get all, what's the word, factional about it, right? Like if that was your friend or whatever, especially as it went on. Yeah, it's a tough system to navigate. I mean, I'm not sure I would recommend to young people to go into theater school these days. I'm grateful I did it. I also had the opportunity to do it again when I went to England to do my master's at a different school at East15. And that was a whole other kettle of fish, right? Because that was a 1-year master's program with people at all different stages of their careers. And, that's where I was really like, oh, this is what people say about theater school. Because it was not nice. Like, it was not pleasant. There was no camaraderie, right? I was like, oh, this is what people go through. I was lucky at George Brown, but
right. Because what's interesting is I remember, in the course at the time that I was there, and I don't know if they still do this now or if they did this in your day. They talked a lot about, the process is we'll break you down and then we'll build you back up.
Oh yeah.
And they spend a whole lot of time breaking us down and really no time with the
building
other
us back
end.
up. Yeah. I remember the zone of silence. I don't know if that existed in your day.
Oh yeah.
Man, that was. So again, for the uninitiated, I don't know how you guys did it, Phil, but in our day, it was like you were in a classroom and you were given certain tasks, like go into a room and unpack your bag, to be done in total silence for like months on end. And it didn't matter what you did. It was always wrong.
Yes. Yes.
And you'd spend like hours sitting there watching your classmates do stuff, like so dull. Of course, right? Like most of it. And just thinking, oh man, I'm going to go crazy here. And clown was another one. They were just like, okay, ultimate humiliation. Right? Because that's the basis of clown. So it's quite a process. It's quite wild.
I remember thinking years later, after, being out of school for a while, being like, I think I'm ready now to go back and do the Zone of Silence.
Mm-hmm.
Because as a punk ass 18-year-old kid, I don't think I was ready for what that experience was offering.
100% not. No, it is so true. Like, I was like 18 when I went to George Brown. When I went to my master's program, I was like 26. And same thing, we had a movement class where we had to like lie on the cold floor on a pole with our legs in the air. And it was exactly what we had done at George Brown.
Right.
At George Brown, every morning I was like, oh, fuck this, man. And this time I was like, oh, this is the best. Oh, I'm so grateful to be lying on this pole. You kids don't know what you're missing. So I think there is an element to that, right? Older and wiser.
Yeah, there's certainly a point of, because I think that the insecurity is so high when you go in when you're young.
100%, yeah.
That some of the offerings you're just not able to accept. I know that I wasn't.
No, 100%.
And it wasn't until later that I was like, you know what? I think now I could really throw myself into that. But also, I don't want to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the right stage of life and it's the wrong stage of life. Certainly the folks who are a bit older than us 18-year-olds, I think probably did better. But also probably spent more time being like, kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter Wilde was our head of acting.
Oh yes, I had Peter for period study.
Yeah,
he just passed. Bless him.
I know. He used to. We would be doing something, and when he was giving notes, he'd just stop. Sometimes he'd just say, "I wish you were 30. You should all come back to me when you're 30." He would say. We would all be like, "No, I'll be practically dead by then.
I know, my life will be over, Peter." He used to say to me, he used to be like, "You are not a biddable young woman, which is good, but you must learn to be, or else you will not get on." And I'm like, fuck that, Peter, I don't want to get on, whatever. And and years later, when I did start writing and when I had my first play in SummerWorks, I mean, bless him, he showed up and he was like, "Aha, now you are an artista." And I was like, "Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Peter." Like, he was always quite supportive of that.
No, absolutely. I remember I did a production a number of years ago with a theater company called Keystone Theatre. And he came to our show, The Belle of Winnipeg. It was like the opening night. And I remember him saying, "In a real city, this show would never close." He was like always so like,
so quotable, right? Like put the man on a t-shirt.
But he was always, it was always honest.
Yeah.
But once he was no longer your teacher, it felt a little less harsh.
Yeah, absolutely. He was super, super harsh with people. Like, again, I don't think I got the worst of it, but some of my classmates, I mean, he was very, as all the teachers were, like they could get really personal with people in ways that, people still remember to this day. Like,
yes. Yeah.
And you want people to be honest with you, but I do think we really just need kindness, because I think the mentality was a bit like sports, right? You got to be hard, and then the toughest people will rise to the top, and that's what you need. But you're discounting those who that might not be their style, that might not be their way. Yeah. But what they have to offer is no less beautiful, right? So, and we're kind of coming to that now, right? Rehearsal halls don't have to be like this kind of frightening, kind of the loudest voice wins. I mean, that's for TV writer rooms. Leave that over there, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting. We're sort of hopefully switching a bit to be a little more inclusive, which is necessary, right?
Yeah.
You can't just...
I always felt like, yes, there was a lot of the harshness, and sometimes I felt like there were a lot of teachers who were like, "Well, this is how I was trained, and so this is how you're going to be trained."
Right.
But I also know a lot of people who finished theater school and said, "God, I need a year off now."
Yeah.
And then never went back to it.
Yeah, for sure. Like, of your class, like, are people still working? That
there are a few.
There are a few, right?
There are a few. I can count on one hand the number who are still in the industry from my class. Yeah.
Mine, it's mostly the women beating the odds there, ladies. But, most folks kind of, did a role or two and then drifted away from it. It's tough out there.
It is tough out there. I do also think that, like, because of really how brutal the theater school can be, when you come out on the other end, you never had any kind of like, okay, here's your little cushion before you head out there. Now go fly, my little bird. It was just like, well, you're done. Get out there. And then you find out how that it's also hard.
I know. It's just, it's very sort of anticlimactic and brutal.
Yes. Yeah.
That first summer is a strange place. So some people were lucky, like, I got a silly commercial right away and I was just like, oh, great. So this is how things are going to go. I'll just get some jobs now. And then, that ran out and I'm just like, oh no, it's the dark tea time of the soul. And, of course for me, because the school had said that my destiny was going to be these great things and I wasn't achieving that. So I was like, oh, I must be doing something wrong. Because, they said that this path was laid out for me. Right. I must have messed it up. And again, years later, you're like, oh, they didn't know. They were just throwing people up on the gaming table and just wishing them luck. And
they're taking a gamble. It's like, we think that this person is good at this stage in their life. And it is a gamble. It's a gamble.
They can't see into the future, right? So.
Who can? Who can?
Totally.
That's why I kind of feel like it's best. I really feel like it's best to let students go through, let them self-select. If people are not showing up for class, you're going to cut them, right? Yeah. In that case, if people are consistently late and they don't pull up their, they don't tie up their shoes and get things going, or they're not showing up for class, you cut them, but not for ability. Let everybody, or not for perceived ability, give everybody the chance to prove themselves, and they probably will without the fear.
Absolutely. But
now you mentioned part of your, as you were, your parents were, had to give me something to do. I think you said, was it something that you asked for? Had you been like I know my gateway to theater was actually Broadway soundtrack albums, original cast albums.
Yes, classic. Yes.
Figuring out that, like as a child, these songs tell a story, that sort of thing, and that was like my gateway into theater. Was yours just your parents being like, we could do soccer, we can do theater, we can do these sorts of things. Let's get into something. Or
I think my dad harbored slight aspirations of theater himself, which he never really went into. I do remember I went to see A Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when I was young, and I was like, yeah, that. So I definitely was asking, but I think it kind of dovetailed quite nicely into the family's kind of desires and needs at that point too. And but it was the disadvantage in doing it your whole life in like a small community where they keep putting you in stuff is that when I got to theater school, I was like, yeah, I know what I'm doing, which was ridiculous. I'm like, I know. Okay. I've been in musicals since I was 6.
And that's when you find out that how little you actually know.
Oh, right? Man. What I truly didn't know was how to just not be kind of an insecure person or to just not be like, hey guys, I'm feeling kind of rough about this, right? Rather than just be like, I'm fine, whatever. Yeah. Like just, you need to get out of your own way a bit, which only really for me came with age. It was hard to do it at that age. Yeah.
Again, that's kind of like, cause we're all insecure when we're like, if we go to theater school when we're like 18, right out of high school.
What do we know?
We know nothing, but we think we know everything. And we're also insecure, which is a terrible way to try to learn.
Yeah. And also, I don't know about you, but first year was all about being like, these people are hot. All these people that I'm hanging out with every day in our like sweatpants are hot. Everybody's hot. You're just like, everyone's gorgeous and interesting and different and maddening. It was just, how does any good work system?
I get that. I did have that, but I also had a lot of, this person's good. Like, yeah. And also I was struggling with the zone of silence for what feels like a year and trying to be like, when are we going to learn? When are we acting? And all this sort of stuff. Right?
It did go on forever, didn't it? The zone of silence.
Well, it went on forever as just like, because I remember it was like a doctor's office was the first one.
No, doctor's office.
Sit in the doctor's office.
Oh, flashbacks.
But what am I supposed to do?
Do it in the doctor's office.
You just sit in the doctor's office.
In the doctor's office, yeah.
And then there were like scenarios that were added, but it was still silent. Yeah. And then one person had the vocal breakthrough in a scene.
Yes.
And I remember sitting like as everybody watching this scene as this person like built up to, didn't even realize like they were fighting the urge to speak so hard.
Because I think that killed it, right? The minute someone spoke, that was it. It was over.
Right. But then also it was like, that's what it was supposed to teach us, the value of words, the value of speaking, right?
Right.
And so as this person is fighting, talking, everybody just sort of leaning more and more forward and forward and forward until they did spoke and speaking. Yes, that ended the scene, but it was also like see, this is what it's about, is earning the right to speak, that sort of thing. And then we spent the rest of the time trying to manufacture that.
Yeah, I know. And then you're trying to, or if you're that person who spoke and it was organic and beautiful, then you'll always be trying to recapture it, which you must never, but you do, because you're like, oh, I was so good when I did. Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. Again, I wish I'd had the courage to say, okay, you know what? I will come back when I'm 30. I'll come back. Yeah. Or even at 25, at 20, like I'll come back at 25. But, I was like, I will be almost dead by the time I'm 25.
Correct. We do not have time.
We don't have time. We got to get out there.
That's right. We've got to get out there and be amazing. Yeah, no, I know. It would have just felt like impossible.
Right.
Whereas now I'm like, oh, we had so much time.
So much time.
All the time.
Now, writing has become a big part of what you do. You've written several plays. And some which have won some very prestigious awards. So at what point did you start writing, and what was your impetus to writing?
Well, I lived away in England for a long time. I did my master's there in film, TV, and radio, just because I wanted a bit more media than we got at George Brown. And life was good. I was over there. I was working a lot. Everything was great. And so it was so great that we decided to totally ruin everything by moving back to Canada, at which point all my work stopped. I mean, it didn't quite go like that. My partner was really homesick. There was some family stuff. We had a kid. There were a lot of good reasons propelling us back. But I said to my partner, I'm like, oh, if we go back, they're not gonna be impressed by what I've done over here. They're really not. It doesn't work like that. And my partner was like, no, but you've done good stuff. You've worked with the BBC. You've got like blah, blah. I'm like, it's not going to matter. It's not going to be Toronto, right? And he's like, no, it'll be fine. So, of course, nobody cared. It was actually really funny. Like I came back and it was all the same people that I knew running the theaters, and I kind of did the audition circuit, and everybody was like, oh, that's really interesting what you've been up to for 7 years. What have you been doing here? And I was like, well, nothing, because I've been over there doing stuff. And they're like, okay, well, come back when you've done some things. I mean, that was kind of the message, right? Like, you've been away. We're not really sure about you. You've kind of missed out. Like, your peers who have been here have progressed and have been in some things, some summer stock, and we just don't know. Like, it was this real sense of like, do some stuff here, and then maybe we'll think about working with you. And I was like,
fascinating.
Yeah.
That's fascinating, because I know people have done the trajectory where they've done a few things here. They maybe did a season at Stratford, season at Shaw. And then they went to New York and they had a role in a show in New York, and then they came back from that and everybody was like, now you are everything.
I know. And that's kind of what some people said. They're like, no, you're going to have England on your resume now. It's going to be great. But I don't know if I didn't do the big enough things here first. Because, out of theater school, I got some things and I was like, yay. And then there was a real big dry spell and I was like, well, what shall I do now? And that's where the England plan came about. And I think it just didn't work that way for me. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe they were just like, you're just not good. They should have just told me that, rather than being like, go do some work. You don't know any, like, I basically fell out of the, I didn't know anybody anymore. And it's interesting because this definitely was a thing. I was like, well, okay. So, I was kind of, bummed about that and had to get a really boring Joe job working in insurance, and then, a bunch of people died in my life, and it was just bad times. It was not a happy scenario. And I was just like, who would move to this country, man? Like, I think it was the big year of the ice storm too. I think it was that big ice storm, 2013 or 2012. Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, cause there was a moment of like being in our shitty rental apartment with like our baby, who we had moved from friends and comfort and a big support system, and like literally like shivering in a bed with no power and just being like, fuck this, man. So, I mean, a lot of it was really born out of like despair and grief and just being like, well, I got to do something to channel these feelings. And so I wrote a play, as one does, as no one ever does. But also I was thinking a lot about this idea, like, what is this country? Like, why would people come to this country? And I'd been thinking about, the first settlers who came over and, why they did that. And I'd also kind of bounced around this idea of talking about the filles du roi, like the young French women who were sent over to marry whatever hairy, smelly, white fur trappers were out here. And just thinking about like who those women were. Now it's interesting, like in French and in Quebec, they've explored that really well. They're really into that side of their history. They've made lots of movies and miniseries and stuff about it, but it didn't seem to me like there were too many stories that I knew of that involved that. So out of that kind of juicy cocktail of sorrow and desperation and homesickness and loss and curiosity came my first play, which I wrote in 2014, and submitted it places because why not? And it got picked up at SummerWorks. And you know what the first thing they said when they called was? They were like, "We don't know you. Who are you? Who do you know that we know?" And I was like, "Oh man, it's just a country club." But I was really it was interesting, but it was very lucky that they decided they liked it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting, I think, you mentioned that in French Canada, they've explored a lot of their history. I think that, that's something that they've done because they hold really fast to their Frenchness,
Yes.
and that history.
Uh-huh.
And whereas in English Canada, we don't tend to dwell on our history.
No.
Very much, especially not theatrically. Which means not any other way.
It's pretty ugly too, a lot of it, right? And I mean, a lot of the earliest stuff is only written in French. So there's lots of practical reasons it doesn't happen. And, once you get into start trying to explore a female side or a non-colonizer voice, it becomes even more interesting and more thorny. It just really seemed like a good metaphor to try and, I mean, it was also like, Idle No More was really rising, at that point. And it was a really good moment for me, having been away and kind of returning to the country, to be like, okay, what is this country and what is, our relationship, my relationship as a settler with these issues, and how do I engage with it and try to find my way, feel like I can belong here. 'Cause I certainly didn't at that point. So yeah, it all kind of, all of that came out into my first play. Yeah.
And you kept writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. Well, that play it was nice. It got put up at SummerWorks and people came and saw it and people were interested in it and wanted to know more about it. And then, Storefront that was, picked it up and programmed it in their season. And then unfortunately, they went under. So they unfortunately lost their space, a month or two before we were supposed to, put the show on, the remount of Deceitful. Yeah, it was a rough New Year's, Phil. It was a rough call to get on that New Year's. I was just like, ruined Rogue One for me completely. I was supposed to be going to see Rogue One that night. And I was just like, not only is this movie depressing, I was like, come on, in Star Wars, there'll be a happy ending. Oh, God damn it, Rogue One. But we found a way. We kind of rallied, and the factory stepped up to kind of support us, and we ended up kind of moving the show into their studio space, and we made it happen, which is really cool. And an amazing team of actors who just rolled with it and were really amazing. And then from that, another play happened that went on at the Assembly Theatre, and that's the one that really kind of got a lot of accolades. For whatever reason, people were just like, "Hi, I really like this weird dialogue of settlers and, indigenous folks that has some jokes and some sexy bits and some knife fights. Great. Love it." And then we were set to do the third one, right before the pandemic. That kind of kiboshed that idea for a while.
Ugh. Yeah.
Yeah. We've all been there. We've all been there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Something occurred to me as somebody who's had some time working in the UK,
mm-hmm.
And then come back
mm-hmm.
to this country.
Mm-hmm.
As far as theater goes,
mm-hmm.
We don't treat our theater particularly well. We We see it as a frivolity. We see it as something that is unnecessary. And yet, my perception, the people that I know who live in England and have been in England for a while, they go to the theater. They see value in it. It's like something that you do. Has that struck you, the difference between the two, as far as like the value of theater?
100%. I mean, I think not exclusively, and it is changing a lot because people are working very hard to make it change. But I do think a lot of theater still seems to be for old white people, or at least not for them, but they are the ones who go, who have the season's tickets. Whereas, in the UK, everybody went. And, there were a lot of reasons for that because at the time, and this has changed too. I mean, I think in a lot of ways, I did come back at a good time because a lot of money has been ripped out of the arts in the UK. And I mean, like with their Brexit, things have taken a turn for the worse there. But at the time, there was a lot of funding so people could get very cheap tickets. There were a lot of youth initiatives, a lot of outreaches to try and get people into the theaters who weren't just old and wealthy and white. And it worked. And it is a lot more part of the culture that people just go. But I do think affordability is, and there's so many theaters to choose from as well. I mean,
yes,
you can always be seeing something, but I did definitely notice that like people just went as a matter of course to all kinds of things. Like you would go with friends, you would go on a date. Whereas here a theater is like an event. You have to, because it's expensive,
Yeah. It's expensive. And also, I think sometimes, it feels like an obligation.
Yeah.
If it's not like one of the big Mervish shows, which seems to be the ones that people quote unquote want to see. There's a lot of, I should see that, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, if you know people in them, you want to go, or, if you want to support a certain group, you want to go. I mean, I also definitely think there's a big difference in how actors and, are treated in terms of, you don't do a monologue in the UK. It's ridiculous. Like you just would not be asked. You would be asked to come in and have a meeting with the director and just chat with them. Maybe you would read a scene with somebody. So that was another big learning when I came back and I was like, Canadian monologue.
Right.
And I have to go to the reference library. It was just like a different kind of relationship. And there's differences in the rehearsal process too. So yeah, it's fascinating. Sure. It's a fascinating thing. But overall, I still feel that there's something very stratified about the theater here. Well, I mean, it's hard though. It's not the same. It's hard you gotta make money and you gotta, it's hard.
Yeah, it is hard. It is hard. And I think there's no answer. Part of me thinks that there is an answer somewhere in our history about why we don't value theater. I think it might go right back to the start of theater in Canada somehow, or like something about our makeup, because Americans tend to go to the theater more than we do. And I
think you're right, probably. I just think it's the typical Canadian thing about, feeling like we're somehow not worthy.
Right.
Like there is that weird, like, oh, we're the second cousin once removed at the table. I don't know. It could just be, well, I don't know. America's a big country too. I mean, we're so spread out, like our theaters and our basis for theater, that's, you can be a big deal in Toronto and know those people, but then you can go to Winnipeg and that doesn't matter.
Right.
And same with out west, like a whole different thing is going on out in Vancouver and on the island, and everybody has their little clique that they're in, and it's all going great for them, but like there's no connection, those cliques.
No, there really isn't. There really isn't. And I've often thought that one of the great ways to experience theater across Canada is, if you can do it, is a tour of the Fringe Festival.
Oh, yeah.
You will learn so much about the uniqueness of each city, not just their festival, but the people in it and the performers and what they like, Like I noticed, doing a Fringe tour years ago, in Edmonton, they like the silly, they like the comedy, they like the sketch. And in other places, they're like, I want something that's a little more serious.
Right.
Everybody has their own thing they're looking for, which is why it just because you're a hit in one city does not mean you're going to be a hit in another. It's really interesting seeing those differences. But again, like you're saying, we're so spread out and far apart.
Yeah.
Those things rarely cross over.
No, it's true. And Fringe is super fascinating for me because when I left to go to the UK, Fringe was very Fringe, right? Like it was super rough. It was like you and your tickle trunk, you know, like I was in some Fringe shows back in the day that you're just like, oh, man, this is rough. People pay money for this.
Yeah.
Whereas I came back and it's like a slick animal out there. The Fringe has evolved and is like, you want to be in that Fringe. It is
that's
punching above its weight now.
Some hits.
Yeah.
Some hits came out of the Fringe and went on to bigger things. And then everybody started chasing that, especially in Toronto. I think
that's right.
There's a less forgiving media landscape. Fringe, the audience is a little less forgiving in Toronto because we've had The Kink in Her Hair, we've had Drowsy Chaperone, I think, and we've had Kim's Convenience.
Kim's Convenience. Yeah, they're like, this better be the next Kim's Convenience.
That's what everybody's looking for. And it's like, how can you be that? You know? So it is a little bit less forgiving than perhaps it once was. Even though it's Fringe, nobody is forgiving. It's like, this show needs some work.
The quality is so much higher. Like, you know, it's amazing what you can see for like $15 and down at the Dundas, you know, work or wherever they're doing it now. Yeah, it's wild. And I was in a Fringe show in 2017. And I was like, this is big deal. Like, this is reviewers are coming and we're at the theater center and we have a set. Wow. Like, who would have thought in my day? I'd be like, guys, the Fringe has a set and it's not wobbling or falling over. They would be like, get out of here. Go on, you know? Like,
for sure.
Yeah, it's very interesting how things change. Yeah.
But I think that also, you know, as say the Edinburgh Fringe grew, all the other fringes grew as well.
Yeah, it's true.
And so, you know, Edinburgh, I mean, we're never going to be Edinburgh.
No.
But, you know, Toronto's
contender.
Third in Canada.
Yeah.
Third largest.
Yeah.
Which surprises people from Toronto, actually, to find out that, like,
they're like, we're not the largest?
We're not the largest? It's like, no. You need to go outside. You need to go travel a bit.
Yeah. And I think that is key. And it's a good, you know, every actor, if they can, should go and act somewhere else because it's a good reminder that, you know, whoever is not seeing you for auditions in Toronto or whatever door you can't bust down, it's good to go somewhere else and be like, oh, right, it is just one place. You know, there are many places where this can happen because you can get very, like, certainly before I went to England, I was just like, oh, you know, I was just consumed by whatever, you know, stage I was at in my relationships with the Shaw casting people or the Stratford or the whatever. And then you think, you're like, oh, right. There are other ways of doing things out there, which is healthy to remember.
Yeah. I do think that the difficulty of, you know, because, you know, self-production, as we were saying earlier, has been such an important part of any theater career in the last 20 years or so, or maybe more. And yet you can't always, like, Fringe is the easiest path to that, but you can't always rely on that draw. You can't rely on that lottery. And
some people can. I can't, but some people seem to figure it out. I'm like, guys, you're the luckiest folks.
I don't know how they do it.
But they've got it figured out. Like, I do know some people who seem to always be in the Fringe, and they have a good network of alliances where it's like, okay, if they draw you, then we're going to work on this thing together. Like, they've kind of, you know, laid that groundwork, which is smart and healthy, and which I would do if I didn't have so much laundry and sweeping to do. No, but seriously, I admire how other people work it. I mean, for me, grant getting has been a real path to success, but you know, that my subject matter is very grant adjacent. Everyone loves to give you some money if you're going to talk about settler indigenous relations. But it's not great. But I feel too that if you want to do the parts that you're not being offered, then that's a big motivator as well. Like,
absolutely,
you know, which, I mean, that has really worked for people. I mean, people have gone on to have incredible careers because they wrote themselves the part that they weren't getting anywhere else, you know? So that certainly is a way. And for me, that was mostly about, you know, just really sort of angry, uncomfortable, sexy women. that was just, that's sort of my wheelhouse. And that was not coming to me. So I'm just like, well, just have to do it myself. But you know, it's funny. I didn't actually, like, it would have been horrifying to me when I was writing my first play if you told me I was going to be in it. That was not my intention at all. But then I was interviewing with a director who was maybe going to be involved in the SummerWorks show. And they said, I'll be involved as long as you promise that you will not by any means act in this thing, because there is nothing worse than a playwright being in their thing, especially if it's her first play, because then you're really just going to look like some kind of dilettante, debutante, full ego project, know nothing person. And I was like, I think I am going to be in this play. Like, you can't throw that down in front of me. You can't, and not have me pick up the dare. But of course, the joke did end up being on me, because then I did have to act in my own thing, which was full of all my own worst, like agony. And, you write that stuff from your heart. You never think you're going to have to act it. And then you do, and you're like, oh, this is terrible. This is terrible that I have to do this every night, but, hey ho, you learn some things.
I do try to write something so that, if I feel bad saying it, like if I feel awkward saying it, I know I have to rewrite it. So sometimes it's good to sort of make yourself say the words. So you're like, this is not working for me, so I guess maybe I should rewrite it.
It was more just that, like, I wrote these big feelings, and I'm like, I'm going to have to go out there and cry and, like, get upset every night, because that's what I wrote for some other actress to do. And I'm going to have, like, a bad love affair every night now. Didn't think that went through. It's just smart ass. I mean, that's what it is, right? That's what it is. But it is, and it's very humbling, right? It's incredibly humbling, because you're like, I write this thing, go act it, people. And then you get in and you're like, oh, this is tough, actually. What I'm asking people to do. So as usual, very humbling. Yes. And actors are so smart. I mean, it's one of the biggest joys for me about writing my own stuff is that, actors come and take it on with their brains and their bravery, and they make all the sense out of all the things that, barely made sense or were a concept in my head. Like, oh, look at the actors solving it. God, they're amazing. And that is really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. What happened with the show that didn't happen due to the pandemic?
The show that didn't happen. So, I mean, hopefully it will still happen. We're trying to thankfully there's a bit more grant money floating around. So we're trying to make it happen. Now the big issue is trying to find space, because so many spaces have kind of packed up, or trying to make it happen, trying to work it out, looking at some space. So hopefully that can happen around this time next year. That's the goal. It'd be great to put it on its feet. But meanwhile, the Canada Arts Council very kindly gave us a digital grant to put all the 3 plays on radio podcast form. So we've just kind of wrapped up the recording of that, and now we're into the editing process. So hopefully that'll be out in the world this fall. So, I mean, I would love to get the 3rd play on stage. I think then finally I could kind of put this particular New France demon to bed. People are like, are you going to write any more? I'm like, oh man, I don't know. In like 5 or 6 years of this particular obsession, I think it might be time to let it go. But it would be great to get it up on stage and give it a crack.
Now, as somebody who wrote something specifically for audio and who's been adapting it for the stage, going the other way, taking a stage play and a series of stage plays at that, and adapting them for audio, what kind of changes are you finding that you have to make? What is that process like to take something that was for the stage and adapting it for audio?
Well, the sex scenes are a lot less sexy. But we don't need an intimacy coordinator. So there's that. Pros and cons. I mean, there's a lot of sex and violence in the show, which you have to figure out, right? You're like, oh, we're not going to be able to tell this story visually anymore. So sometimes you need to add in words that feel really clunky. Like you need to name check people in group scenes all the time. Like, Surge, man on my left. You need to be helping the audience because they can't see, right? And so that's why it's been so helpful for me to engage. There's 3 different directors in the audio adaptation, one for each play. Aaron Brandenburg, who worked on the original Deceitful, Tyler Sagan, who did Darkheart at the Assembly, and then Keith Barker, who's been kind of a consultant the whole way through. And they were great because some of them had previous experience with the stage versions, and some of them had never done that. So they were really coming in and being like, this doesn't make sense. I don't know what's happening here. If I just listen to it, I don't know. It's not clear for me. And that was the ultimate goal, was to try to just be clear. That was what I was trying to keep in my mind. And it's hard for me because I know these things very intimately by now. So I'm like, of course it makes sense. that smooching sound, absolutely, it's very clear. And they were like, it's really not. So, we had to have those discussions about, and the actors were great too. They would be like, I don't know, who am I talking? So for me, just trying to bear in mind clarity. And, you had to rewrite some stuff. I had to rewrite some stuff. I'm like, this doesn't work. It doesn't work. It relied on the visual of her pulling the knife out at this point. So we're going to have to figure out another way. And I just had to be really humble and be like, it didn't work, the thing. So never mind. I'll write something better. Give me a minute. But it was really neat. It was really cool. And it was a nice kind of bookend because I had never really done radio plays until I moved to the UK where it is still such a thing. And I really enjoyed performing in them and listening to them there. And then now it's kind of coming back here with podcasts.
Yes.
And big companies like Stratford's got an at-home channel now where they're going to stream this kind of stuff and Play Me and all these, it's kind of coming back. So again, maybe this is kind of, going to be some good that came out of all that.
Yeah.
Or garbage of the pandemic. I would rather have not had the pandemic. That's fine. I don't
100%.
But
100%.
We are where we are, right?
Yes. So, you can't, it's the things that you can't control. And I remember, as we were, 2020, 2021, 2022, the way that theater suddenly had to be like, well, things out of our control. Like, how do we roll with this punch in a way that never really had to happen before? Like,
it's wild.
And
it's, again, very humbling to kind of see, like, even, this theater, we're like, Stratford's got loads of money. Mirvish has all the money, but even they didn't, and even they were running on really tight margins. And, I think Stratford last summer had 20% capacity they were running at or something. And they had shows closed and Dream and High Park closed because of COVID, all this kind of stuff. It was sort of leveling in that way to realize, we're all out here just juggling balls and the rent collectors at the door behind us, like it's always been precarious, but it's just that we all now realize it, right? So
absolutely.
And we keep doing it anyway, Phil.
That's right.
Reason.
That's right. We're committed to it.
We are indeed. We are.
Well, Genevieve, thank you so much for talking with me this evening. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, Phil. Thanks so much for having me.
This has been an episode of Stageworthy. Stageworthy is produced, hosted, and edited by Phil Rickaby. That's me. If you enjoyed this podcast and you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a 5-star rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. Those reviews and ratings help new people find the show. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And remember, if you want to leave a tip, you'll find a link to the virtual tip jar in the show notes or on the website. You can find Stageworthy on Twitter and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the complete archive of all episodes at stageworthy.ca. If you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. See you next week for another episode of Stageworthy.